History remembers empires that rose, but rarely the ones that vanished without a single scream. Tonight, we walk through 15 ancient worlds that disappeared so completely, it's as if they never existed at all. The Indus Valley's silent streets. Night settles slowly over the ancient floodplains, the kind of soft, velvet darkness that seems to absorb every distant sound. In the hush, the Indus cities appear not as relics, but as sleeping giants. Their straight, ruler-true streets lie beneath faint moonlight, so precise that even now, millennia later, they look as if their planners have stepped away only for the evening. Somewhere out there, under layers of dust and gentle sand, rests the script that never learned to speak. Symbols carved onto seals, tiny and deliberate, like whispers trapped inside clay. It is here, in one of the world's earliest urban civilizations, that the story begins to breathe. The traveler approaches Harappa as if entering a dream. There are no grand statues announcing power, no towering palaces claiming divinity. Instead, everything is measured, balanced, quietly confident. Streets intersect at right angles. Homes share walls like neighbors sharing warmth. Beneath the ground, a sophisticated drainage system winds like a hidden river, a feat dated to around 2600 BCE, when much of the world still wandered in tribal clusters. The cities feel almost modern in their restraint, as though time looped forward before circling back. The narrator's voice softens, falling into the slow cadence of night history. Some scholars believe the Indus people valued order above spectacle. Their bricks were standardized, their measurements consistent across hundreds of miles. There is a gentle human comfort in the thought that people so long ago cared for symmetry, for cleanliness, for a kind of quiet urban dignity. Yet for all their brilliance, they left behind no decoding key, no Rosetta Stone, no bilingual inscription. Their script etched onto steatite seals, carved into pottery, pressed into wax, remains an elegant enigma, and scholars still debate whether it was a full written language, or something more symbolic, more ceremonial, more fleeting. The wind drifts between the ancient walls like a storyteller pausing for breath. Every so often, a quirky detail emerges from excavation reports, objects that seem slightly out of place, slightly whimsical, amidst the sober order. One such artifact is the famous unicorn seal, a small carving showing a single-horned creature facing a ceremonial object. Historians tell us it may not represent a unicorn as we imagine it, and yet the symbol repeats across the region, as if it carried a meaning lost to time. A creature that never existed, or a creature remembered imperfectly. No one truly knows. This tiny image, less than 2 inches wide, has sparked debates more heated than discussions of entire empires. Moonlight glints on what once was the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, a massive watertight public pool lined with baked brick. Even now it stands with a solemn presence, its steps descending like an invitation into sacred waters. The narrator lowers their voice, as if afraid to disturb someone bathing there still. Water was ritual here, not a spectacle, not a throne room, but a quiet sanctity. The people who walked these streets understood engineering in ways both practical and spiritual, and yet, despite the scale of their intellect, their story simply evaporates. No graveyards with kings in gold, no proclamations carved in stone, no tales of war or conquest, just silence. It feels, at times, as if the Indus civilization didn't collapse. They merely stepped out of the room, leaving everything tidy behind them. As we noted earlier, history often hides transitions in shadows, letting them blur until even scholars can only guess. Was it climate change? Was the river once mighty, then shifting, turning away from them like an old friend losing its path? Or was it something quieter, something internal, a slow migration rather than a catastrophe? Scholars still debate whether the people of the Indus Valley left because they were forced, or simply because their world changed, one season at a time. The narrator walks the listener gently through dim alleyways, describing how archaeologists found children's toys buried beside broken beads, a sign of families who lived ordinary lives, not the lives of a vanishing myth. There is comfort in the ordinariness, and sorrow in the absence that followed. When the Indo-Aryan migrations swept into the subcontinent, they encountered a land already empty of its metropolitan heart. The cities of the Indus lay sleeping, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. But the newcomers built their own traditions, their own stories. The memory of this civilization slipped away, almost willingly, like a breath dissolving into night air. The camera, in your mind, pulls upward over rooftops shaped by time, over blocks that once held bustling markets, over lanes still lined with silent wells. Each well is circular, deep, constructed with meticulous brickwork, as though crafted by people who valued precision more than glory. They stand like anchors of memory. There is a moment soft, nearly imperceptible, when the narrator wonders aloud, if a civilization this advanced could vanish without a trace of conflict or fire, what else might have disappeared before history learned how to listen? For a long while, the scene rests in near stillness. Crickets hum gently. Nightbirds glide over the plains. The ancient streets remain mute and patient. Somewhere beneath the dust lies a seal that has not yet been found, a symbol that could unlock thousands of years of silence. Or perhaps there is no key at all, only a story meant to be felt rather than deciphered, a reminder that not every brilliance seeks an audience. The Indus Valley holds its secrets lightly, like palms cupping water in the dark. You can sense the weight of forgotten lives, but the details slip away between fingers, no matter how carefully you try to catch them. And yet, the silence has a pulse, one that leads us gently toward another mystery, because far across an ocean, under different stars and cliffs carved by a different wind, another civilization waited, once alive with voices that also fell quiet too soon. A place where entire cities clung to canyon walls until one day they simply didn't. A slow breath, a quiet pause, a soft drum of suspense. Something is stirring in the stone shadows of the southwest. Ancestral Puebloans' cliffside exodus. Night settles differently in the American southwest. It doesn't fall, it drifts, sliding down sandstone cliffs like a slow, warm tide. The moon rises pale and gentle over mesas that glow faintly, as if the day's heat still breathes from within them. In this half-light, the ancient cliff dwellings of the ancestral Puebloans come alive in quiet silhouette. Stacked rooms carved into sheer canyon walls, stairways etched in stone, windows facing a sky once filled with smoke from hearths long cold. The narrator's voice enters like a soft breeze, low, calm, resonant. Here, in the vast labyrinth of the Four Corners region, entire cities once clung to the cliffs as though gravity were merely a suggestion. Places like Mesa Verde, Chaco Canyon, and Canyon de Chelly rise from shadowed stone, their shapes familiar yet unnervingly empty. You can almost sense movement, footsteps on wooden ladders, voices echoing through kivas, the murmur of nighttime rituals carried by sage-scented air. But the people who built all this are gone. Not destroyed, not erased, simply vanished from these homes as if called away in unison. 3, perhaps 4 centuries before the first Europeans glimpsed this land, the ancestral Puebloans abandoned their strongholds. Scholars date the height of their world to around 1100 CE, when great houses of Chaco Canyon aligned with the sun, the moon, and distant mountain peaks. Their stonework was so intricate, so intentional, that many modern visitors assume engineers must have guided it. Yet it was crafted by communities who understood time not by clocks, but by the sky's steady rhythm. The narrator pauses, letting the wind fill the silence. And then, almost abruptly over the course of just a few generations, these cities emptied, ladders were withdrawn, storerooms sealed, fire pits cooled, tools and pottery were left behind as though their owners meant to return, but never did. As we noted earlier, history often prefers to offer fragments rather than explanations. The cliffside exodus remains one of its softest, most enduring puzzles. Some say drought, some say conflict, some say the spirits shifted in ways we cannot measure. Scholars still debate whether the departure was a desperate escape or a ceremonial migration pre-planned and spiritually necessary. The canyons themselves offer hints, subtle as footprints fading in dust. At sunset, the stones radiate a deep rust-red glow, and it is easy to imagine families gathering outside their dwellings, watching the horizon with quiet uncertainty. A megadrought, one of the worst in a millennium, did strike this region around 1276, 1299 CE. Tree ring data confirms years of thirst, of cracked earth, and failing crops. But drought alone rarely empties a civilization so completely, so uniformly, across hundreds of miles. And then there is the fringe detail whispered among local folklore, the vanishing ladders. Some explorers claimed that ancient wooden ladders found leaning against cliff edges were placed so precariously that it seemed they were meant to be lifted at a moment's notice, as if the entire society practiced readiness for a sudden journey. Historians caution against taking such tales literally, of course, but the image lingers. A whole community poised like a flock sensing a shift in the wind. Night deepens. Stars swell into view, slow, cold, and impossibly bright. This region has always belonged to the sky. The ancestral Puebloans built observatories at Chaco Canyon, aligning doorways to the solstices and the lunar standstill cycles that few modern observers even know exist. Some believe their migration was tied not to necessity, but to cosmology, to a shift in the heavens that called them southward toward the Rio Grande Valley, where their descendants, the Pueblo peoples, still live today. The narrator moves gently along a cliff ledge, overlooking a ruin known as Cliff Palace. Its walls fold into the canyon like a secret tucked inside a sandstone book. More than 100 rooms cluster under a vast overhang, shaped by hands that never knew steel, never carved their stories into stone, never imagined their lives would someday become a bedtime whisper for distant listeners. Inside the cool shadows, kivas sink into the rock circular ceremonial chambers, where firelight once flickered over painted faces. Descending into them now feels like sinking into warm earth, as though the past lies just below the surface, shallow enough to touch but too deep to fully grasp. The narrator's voice softens even more. Imagine the final nights here, families gathered around their hearths, children packing clay vessels, elders murmuring prayers toward darkened skies. There is no sign of violent end, no mass graves, no destroyed structures. Instead, what remains feels strangely peaceful, almost chosen, a mystery that exudes calm rather than chaos. Yet there were tensions too. Archaeologists have found evidence of defensive constructions, arrow points embedded in walls, signs that some communities turned inward for protection. It may be that drought and hunger made neighbors uneasy companions. Or perhaps spiritual disagreements fractured unity, pulling once connected settlements apart, but the record remains thin, cautious, unwilling to speak definitively. Still, the disappearance itself feels orchestrated like a curtain closing on a long production. One moment, life fills every crevice of these cliff homes. The next, only silence and wind. The camera rises again in your imagination, gliding over canyons turning silver under moonlight. Down below, a narrow, ancient trail snakes through the brush, a switchback path carved by thousands of feet, now walked mostly by deer and wandering night creatures. There is a particularly haunting bend where the trail disappears behind a split boulder. Local lore says that if you approach at dusk, you may hear faint laughter, like echoes preserved in the stone. Scientists, naturally, attribute this to acoustics, but legends persist, gentle and persistent as the desert wind. Somewhere, a lone owl drifts out from a dark cavity, wings silent, tracing the path ancient people once took when they left these cliffs behind. Toward greener lands, toward river valleys, toward an unspoken destiny. What they carried with them, we cannot know. What they left behind, time has softened into riddles. But the earth remembers patterns long after people depart. Pottery fragments reveal stylistic transitions. Footprints carved into stone steps show wear on only one side, a sign that many walked downward and few walked back up. A single corn cob, found in a sealed room, was carbon dated to the final decades before abandonment or last harvest, held in quiet stasis. In the stillness, the narrator wonders aloud. If a civilization could decide, together, to leave behind their monumental homes without panic, what whispers guided them? What sign in the sky? What shift in belief? What moment of collective understanding? The clues drift like sand, reshaping themselves each time the story is told. And so, the cliff dwellings remain like lanterns, extinguished but not forgotten, suspended between memory and myth, between practicality and ritual. You can stand here at midnight and almost sense a curtain lifting, a presence brushing past, a line of travelers moving silently toward the horizon. And as the night deepens, the narrator gently turns the listener toward the next chapter. For across a much older desert, beneath rose-red stone that glows like dusk trapped in mineral, another ancient city waits, carved not into cliffs, but out of them. A city whose beauty seemed immortal, until it too fell quiet. Petra's shadowed corridors are calling, softly, from across the sands. Petra's phantom architects, Dawn comes to Petra like a whispered secret, slow, rose-coloured and impossibly gentle. Before the sun crests the ridgeline, the sandstone walls glow from within, warming as though a long-sleeping city is remembering its own breath. Carved facades rise from the desert floor in cathedral-like silence. Columns fluted by time, doorways tall enough to swallow shadows whole, and the famed Treasury al-Khazneh, sitting in its narrow throat of stone like a jewel cradled in twilight. The narrator's voice enters softly, the tone of a dark history storyteller wandering through sacred ruins at daybreak. Here, in the ancient heart of Jordan, the Nabateans shaped an empire not with swords, but with carving tools and flowing water. They chiseled entire buildings from cliffs so sheer that even now it is difficult to imagine human hands crafting such perfection. Their city rose more than 2,000 years ago, flourishing around the 1st century CE, positioned at the crossroads of the incense trade routes. But the greatest mystery is not how Petra lived, it is how it slipped away. We walk slowly through the Seek, a narrow canyon that spirals like a sandstone labyrinth. The walls rise hundreds of feet overhead, a corridor of natural architecture, guiding travelers toward a city that feels carved out of memory. Footsteps echo softly here, not loudly enough to disturb the past, but just enough to remind you that people once crossed these stones with camels, with caravans, with treasures perfumed by Arabia's distant sands. A breeze drifts down the passageway, carrying faint desert coolness as the narrator describes a civilization skilled in the quiet arts of survival. The Nabateans mastered water management with astonishing precision, channeling rain from every hidden crevice of the mountains into reservoirs and cisterns. They coaxed life from arid stone, storing enough water to support tens of thousands even through seasons of drought. Their systems were so ingenious that some channels still function today, murmuring softly along the canyon walls like veins beneath ancient skin. Yet, for all their brilliance, the Nabateans left behind no grand historical chronicle, no epic inscriptions proclaiming their king's victories, no imperial boast carved across continents. Their language survives, but their story remains soft-spoken, its details slipping between centuries like desert sand. The narrator brushes fingers against the stone, its surface warm and smooth. Petra was not merely built, it was coaxed from the cliffs, shaped as though the rock itself wished to tell a story. The treasury's facade catches light in 1,000 shades of red, gold, and purple, colours that shift with the sun like a living painting. Each column and figure carved into its surface seems to watch silently as visitors approach. And yet, despite its modern fame, the treasury was never truly a treasury. Scholars believe it may have been a tomb, a shrine, or a monumental symbol of Nabatean identity. But no one knows for certain. Scholars still debate whether the Nabateans carved these wonders for the dead, or if the cliffs were meant to be living guardians, watching over trade and travellers alike. The historian's voice lowers into a slow, atmospheric murmur. As we noted earlier, civilizations often vanish without a neat explanation. Petra is no different. By the 4th century CE, the city began to dim. Trade routes shifted. The Roman Empire absorbed Nabatea, turning Petra into a provincial town rather than a thriving capital. Earthquakes struck one particularly devastating quake in 363 CE, damaged aqueducts and buildings so severely that parts of the city were abandoned. Yet none of these reasons alone explain Petra's near-total silence. And then there is the curious fringe detail whispered by early explorers, stories of a hidden civilization still living in the tombs, guarding treasures cursed to outsiders. The myths, though unfounded, clung stubbornly to Petra's identity, adding a layer of ghostly charm to its already mysterious character. Some tales even claimed the treasury bore bullet holes marks left by Bedouins, who believed gold lay within the upper urn, waiting to be cracked open. And indeed, you can still see the small round scars on its facade, tiny memories of hope and superstition. Night begins to fall again in our wandering narrative. The cliffs darken, the colours cooling into rich maroon and shadow. In this dimness, Petra feels even more alive. The empty tombs seem to breathe. The carved steps seem touched by unseen feet. The silence becomes a presence rather than an absence. Inside the royal tombs, the stone glows faintly with natural mineral patterns, swirls of purple, red, cream, and deep gold. If you hold a lantern close, the interiors ignite with soft, dreamlike brilliance, like the inside of an ancient seashell. It is here, in these vast hollow chambers, that we feel the Nabateans most intimately, not through words, but through the shapes they left behind. The narrator lets each image linger. Imagine the final generations of Petra's residents. Families carrying water jars along cobbled pathways. Merchants whispering prices beneath tents lined with incense. Children racing past columns older than their lineage. And then gradually, almost imperceptibly, life draining away. The city didn't fall violently. It faded, like a lantern flickering as oil runs thin. Archaeologists discovered pottery shards and coins from the later centuries, indicating that people lived here long after its peak. But the population thinned, houses collapsed and were never repaired. Sand crept in, swallowing streets grain by grain. The trade routes that once made Petra wealthy shifted toward the north and sea, leaving this once vibrant hub stranded in the desert's quiet embrace. As the narrator walks deeper into the city, a faint sound accompanies the story, the echo of a breeze passing through the hollow chambers of the urn tomb. It is easy to imagine voices lingering here, fragments of conversations carried across centuries. The Nabateans were masters of blending cultures, adopting influences from Greece, Egypt, and Arabia. Their gods, their architecture, even their clothing carved into stone show a world that thrived on diversity. And yet, for all this, they seemed almost allergic to self-glorification. No inscriptions praising kings, no carved triumphs, only humility carved into grandeur. This lack of written legacy leaves historians balancing on a thin line between knowledge and myth. What we know is a skeleton. What we feel is the echo of a vanished heart. A soft callback emerges, linking us gently to the Indus Valley and the Puebloan cliffs. And as we noted earlier, when a civilization leaves more beauty than explanation, its silence becomes part of the architecture. Petra embodies that silence, majestic, warm, welcoming, and unknowable. In the soft darkness, the narrator wanders to the monastery, a massive structure carved high in the mountains. Reaching it requires climbing hundreds of steps, each one worn smooth by centuries of pilgrimage. The monastery stands even larger than the treasury, its facade rising like a watchful guardian over valleys that glow blue beneath starlight. Sitting before it, one feels impossibly small and strangely comforted. Perhaps the Nabateans left because the world turned its back on desert trade. Perhaps they were absorbed into other communities, their identity slipping gently into broader cultural currents. Or perhaps, as some scholars whisper, their spiritual centers shifted, drawing them toward Hegra, toward new settlements, toward a future we cannot trace. The narrator's breath slows, offering the listener a moment of stillness. Petra was never truly lost. It simply waited, hidden from Western knowledge until 1812, when Swiss explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt disguised himself as a local and followed rumors of a city carved into rose-red stone. When he entered the Sikh and saw the treasury emerge from shadow, he reportedly paused, overwhelmed by a beauty unchanged by time. Even now, that moment repeats itself with every traveler who reaches the end of the canyon. Petra doesn't reveal itself, it appears, like a memory resurfacing. And as our journey through ancient mysteries continues, the narrator turns the listener toward a colder wind, toward a different landscape, where ancient flames rose again and again in ritual cycles no one can fully decipher. For far to the northwest, beyond deserts and mountains, another civilization once burned its own homes with deliberate, patient purpose. A whisper of smoke, a hint of firelight, a strange devotion to destruction. Cucuteni Tripilia awaits. In the glow of ritual flames, Cucuteni Tripilia's ritual of flame. Evening drifts across the old plains of Eastern Europe, settling like a silver veil over quiet hills and forests that have witnessed more forgotten ages than living memory can hold. The wind is cool here, gentle, grassy, carrying the scent of distant fields and river valleys that once shone with fires no one can fully explain. Under this soft, fading light, the world feels both familiar and strange. You can almost sense the presence of those who lived here 7,000 years ago, before Rome, before Egypt's pyramids, before stone cities rose anywhere on earth. The narrator's voice enters slowly, warm and atmospheric, the way a lantern glow enters a dark room without disturbing its stillness. On this land, stretching across modern Romania, Moldova, and Ukraine, the Cucuteni Tripilia culture built some of Europe's earliest large settlements, vast, circular communities with houses arranged like rings of a great, gentle labyrinth. Their villages were astonishingly advanced for their age. Here, around 4,800, 3000 BCE, people painted pottery with spirals and symbols so intricate they looked like the work of later kingdoms. Their houses rose 2 stories tall, with woven walls and decorated interiors. Their figurines, plump, stylized, mysterious, suggest rituals that blended earth, fertility, and cosmic cycles. And yet, it wasn't their art or architecture that earned them a place among the world's strangest ancient mysteries. It was what they did at the end of each settlement's life. The narrator pauses, letting the listener feel the quiet tension, the soft undercurrent of unease beneath the plains. Every few generations, sometimes every 60 to 80 years, the Cucuteni Tripilia people would gather as a community and burn their entire village to the ground, not in panic, not in rage, but with a calm deliberation that carries a sense of ritual. Hundreds of houses, ceremonial structures, storage pits full of grain, everything. The flames would rise into the night, consuming walls that had been plastered again and again until they glowed white like bone. Archaeologists found that these homes were fired so intensely that some collapsed into pools of molten clay heat, reaching over 1,000 degrees, far beyond what a normal accidental fire could produce. As the narrator whispers this, the plains seem to shift in memory, glimmers of imagined flame dancing across fields now silent. And scholars still debate whether these burnings were acts of renewal, purification, or something far more complex. Some believe they rebuilt their settlements atop the ashes to symbolize rebirth, each village, like a phoenix, rising again in a new cycle. Others suggest ritual closure, a sacred farewell to the spirits of the home, and there are those who wonder if it represented something else entirely, a cosmology lost to time, a spiritual relationship with fire no modern tradition quite resembles. But one quirky detail shines among the ashes. In several burned houses, archaeologists discovered entire sets of pottery, beautifully decorated vessels intentionally smashed before the flames consumed them, as though breaking the objects freed something within them, as though the fire was not destruction, but release. The narrator's voice softens. Imagine the night of a ritual burning, the horizon tinted orange, children gathered close to elders, the air thick with smoke and quiet chanting. A community watching their world transform into glowing embers, knowing that new walls, new hearths, new life would emerge from the ashes. And then, after the fire, they would move on, sometimes rebuilding nearby, sometimes traveling farther to form an entirely new settlement. Over centuries, these cycles created vast networks of burned layers beneath the soil, like pages in a book written in flame. The connection thread gently ties back to earlier tales. As we noted earlier, ancient civilizations often held onto rhythms that don't translate easily into modern logic. The Indus Valley left silent scripts. The Puebloans left empty cliffs. Petra left carved ghosts. And here, amid the rolling plains of prehistoric Europe, the Cucuteni Tripilia people left fire as their final signature. Their settlements grew larger over time, some reaching almost city-like proportions, with thousands of inhabitants, astonishing for a Neolithic society. One site, near modern-day Taljanki in Ukraine, covered more than a square kilometre, its houses forming great concentric circles visible even today through satellite images. These were not wandering hunters. They were planners, builders, artists, and ritualists, living in worlds shaped by cycles both earthly and spiritual. Yet the burning practice remains the brightest flame of their mystery. Some fringe interpretations claim the fires were acts of warfare or invasion, but repeated patterns tell a gentler tale. The uniformity of burn layers across hundreds of sites suggests intention, not violence. The houses often appeared orderly before the fire, with objects placed where they belonged as if waiting to be transformed. And in many cases, the settlement was rebuilt immediately after the burn, sometimes with an almost ceremonial precision. But then, around 3000 BCE, their world shifted, slowly at first, then sharply. Climate changes darkened the skies of Europe. Steppe nomads pressed in from the east. New technologies, bronze weaponry, horseback cultures altered the balance of power. The Cucuteni Tripilia people, with their peaceful settlements and ritual cycles, began to disperse. Their villages faded from the landscape, their burning rites ceased, their art vanished. Like the Nabateans, like the cliff dwellers, like the Indus scribes, they slipped beyond the reach of continuous memory. Night thickens across the plains in the narrator's voice. Stone-cold stars gather watchful, pale, unblinking. Wind moves through tall grasses, as though carrying stories too old to decipher. Somewhere, beneath soft soil, lies a burned layer from a house that collapsed 7,000 years ago. Its clay still fused, its walls still showing faint fingerprints of those who shaped them. The narrator walks slowly through an imagined reconstruction, a two-story dwelling, plastered and painted, with storage jars lining the walls and a hearth smouldering in the center. The wooden beams crackle, the clay figurines watch with their emotionless faces. There is a feeling here, deep and ancient, that the flames were not feared, but honored, a rhythm of letting go, a ritual of endings, a whisper of something important that modern people have forgotten. One cannot help but wonder, what did the Cucuteni Tripilia see in fire that we no longer understand? Was it cleansing? Was it sacrifice? Was it a way to transition into a new phase of life? Or did each burning tell a story, a communal chapter closed with reverence, echoing through generations? As the narrator steps away from the imagined flames, shadows lengthen across the plains. A hush settles. The air cools, like the last breath of a finished ritual. And from this quiet place, from this land of forgotten fire, the journey turns westward, toward the sea, toward a kingdom whispered in myths, toward a civilization whose disappearance feels like an echo of Atlantis itself. A shimmer of gold, a breath of salt wind, a name half swallowed by legend. Tartessos waits, just beyond the horizon of memory. Tartessos, the Atlantis echo. Twilight settles over the far edges of the Iberian Peninsula like a slow exhale, soft, violet, and tinged with the faint scent of the Atlantic. The river that ancient writers once called Betis, flowing gently toward the sea, glimmers in the fading light. Marshes stretch out like a quiet mirror, reflecting clouds drifting low and lazy. In this moment, the land feels suspended between worlds, between memory and myth, between history's quiet truths and stories whispered by ancient sailors. The narrator's voice descends with calm, dark, history, warmth steady, atmospheric, carrying the weight of a tale half remembered by time. Long before Rome's legions marched west, before Carthage cast its shadow across the Mediterranean, there was said to be a kingdom of gold and salt and silver, a place where the rivers shimmered with minerals and the people traded with distant empires. Greek travelers spoke of it with reverence. Herodotus wrote of its wealth. Phoenician merchants sailed there, returning with stories heavy as their cargo. They called it Tartessos, and then one day, it was gone, not destroyed in fire, not overtaken by conquerors, just quietly removed like a page torn cleanly from history's book. As the narrator walks beside the darkening river, the air grows still, holding the listener in a hush of expectancy. The reeds sway softly, like ancient voices murmuring from across the ages. Tartessos flourished between 9th and 6th centuries BCE, its capital somewhere near the Guadalquivir River basin, but its exact location remains an elusive spectre. Archaeologists have unearthed rich tombs, metalwork, pottery, and inscriptions hinting at a sophisticated culture, yet no definitive city has ever been found. Instead, fragments glow like embers, enough to warm the imagination, but not enough to illuminate the whole. As we noted earlier, when a civilization leaves behind shimmering clues rather than full chronicles, it becomes a canvas painted partly by fact and partly by longing. The narrator's tone deepens. Tartessos might have been a nexus of Mediterranean trade, a meeting point where Phoenicians, Greeks, and local Iberian tribes exchanged goods, beliefs, and stories. Its artisans crafted intricate gold ornaments, some in swirling, serpentine shapes that echo the rhythms of the sea. Its rulers, according to Greek legend, wielded immense wealth, their halls gleaming with silver mined from nearby mountains. Yet the people themselves remain shadow-like. Their language, barely glimpsed on a few inscriptions, refuses to connect with any known family. Their kings appear in half-mythic lists. Their customs survive only through the biased lenses of outsiders. And scholars still debate whether Tartessos was a singular kingdom or a constellation of prosperous tribes woven together by trade. But amid all the scholarly caution, one curious detail persists in folklore strange enough to feel like the faint pulse of a forgotten truth. Some ancient writers claim the Tartessians were so attuned to the tides and sands that they built their city partly on structures designed to rise with floods and settle as waters retreated, a kind of living port, always in motion. No archaeological evidence has confirmed this, yet the idea lingers, dancing at the edge of plausibility. The narrator steps closer to the water, allowing the sounds of gentle waves to fill the space between words. Imagine a coastal world where marshes shifted with the seasons, where ships glided through labyrinthine deltas, and where a great city shimmered like a mirage, visible, then hidden, then visible again. A place where trade routes tied continents together long before classical historians were ready to acknowledge such connections. And then imagine that city simply ceasing to appear. Some believe Tartessos fell when the Phoenicians, its closest trading partners, were consumed by warfare in the Mediterranean. Others propose that environmental shifts, rising waters, collapsing riverbanks, slowly swallowed the settlements. And then there is the more dramatic possibility that Tartessos was destroyed by a catastrophic event, perhaps a flood or storm surge so vast it erased entire communities. It is here that the connection to Atlantis flickers softly, like a candle behind silk. Not the fantastical Atlantis of pop culture, but the quiet echo of a real place known, wealthy, admired, and then suddenly gone. Lost to the sea, lost to silence, lost to speculative chapters in ancient texts. The narrator's footsteps slow, and an image forms in the listener's mind. The soft glow of lanterns reflecting on a river that has carried secrets for thousands of years. Somewhere beneath its waters, perhaps under mud, perhaps under silt, may lie the remains of Tartessos. A harbour wall, a bronze workshop, a palace whose foundations still cling to the earth. But the river guards its mysteries with patience. Archaeologists have uncovered hints. The Carambolo treasure, a hoard of gold so ornate it seems, designed to honour forgotten deities. Clay altars shaped like animals, metal tools that reveal skilled craftsmanship. Each piece feels like a whisper. We were here. We were real, but you will not find us easily. And then there is the strange fringe story of the singing river, a phenomenon local fishermen claim to hear at night, a deep, vibrating hum rising from the marshes. Scientists attribute it to shifting waters, moving sediment, or the calls of distant wildlife. But legends insisted it was the voice of a buried city, resonating when tides crossed old stone. The narrator lets the myth rest gently in the air, not asserting it, not mocking it, simply acknowledging how stories survive where evidence fails. Tartessos existed in a time when boundaries between history and myth were soft, porous, like sand shaped by waves. It was remembered by Greek poets as a land ruled by a wise king named Argentonius, who allegedly lived to an age of 120. Whether literal or symbolic, the tale suggests a kingdom admired for its longevity and prosperity. But then the record ends. A sudden silence, a vanishing so complete that later writers spoke of Tartessos as if it were a dream they once had but couldn't fully recall. As we glide deeper into this narrative, the connection to earlier mysteries grows clearer. Petra faded into stone. The Puebloans drifted from their cliffs. The Cucuteni Trapilia let flames close their chapters. And now Tartessos dissolves into water and myth, its final breath lost among tides. Night returns to the river mouth, painting the marshes in shades of deep blue and ghostly silver. Fireflies blink faintly, as though trying to guide the listener toward truths buried just beyond reach. The surface of the water ripples, distorting reflections of the moon. The narrator pauses, offering the listener a moment of silence, an invitation to imagine the lost harbour lights of a kingdom that once glowed on this very shore. And then, softly, perhaps Tartessos is not truly lost. Perhaps it lives in fragments scattered through Iberian folklore, in archaeological shards, in the quiet hum of a river moving over forgotten stone. Or perhaps, somewhere beneath the marshlands, an entire city sleeps its walls intact, its secrets sealed, waiting for the right tide, the right excavation, the right moment. The night grows deeper, the waves hush. The wind carries a faint scent of salt and ancient metals. And from this mysterious shoreline, the narrator turns gently toward another world, one where jungle humidity wraps around stone, where colossal heads stare through time with serene, unreadable expressions. A world where the first great civilization of Mesoamerica rose and vanished. The path shifts now, toward dense green shadows, toward the land of the Olmec. The Olmec Stone Sentinels. Night in the Gulf Coast lowlands is a slow, humid breath. The air hangs thick and warm, carrying the scent of mangroves and distant rain. Under the moon's pale glow, the jungles of Tabasco and Veracruz stir with gentle whispers, leaves shifting, insects humming, distant water pooling in unseen channels. Hidden beneath this living canopy lies the memory of a civilization older than the Maya, older than the Aztecs, older than nearly every great power that would later rise across Mesoamerica. A civilization we call the Olmec. The narrator's voice enters like a soft drumbeat, ancient and steady, the tone of someone wandering through a world that once pulsed with rituals and mysteries now wrapped in green shadow. Somewhere in the darkness, half buried beneath vines, a colossal stone head gazes toward the night sky. Its features, broad nose, fleshy cheeks, helmet-like crown, are carved with such precision that the face feels alive. The eyes seem to follow you, not angrily, not even solemnly, but knowingly, as though the stone remembers something you have not yet learned. These heads, some weighing up to 50 tons, are among the world's greatest enigmas. They were carved more than 3,000 years ago, around 1,200–400 BCE, and transported across miles of swamp and forest without wheels, without metal tools, without beasts of burden. Each head depicts a ruler or revered figure, capturing expressions with uncanny realism. One smiles faintly, another frowns in concentration, another gazes sideways, as though listening for something far beyond human hearing. The Olmec carved at least 17 of these monoliths, and each one sits like a guardian of untold stories. And yet, we know so little of the people who shaped them. As we noted earlier, some civilizations speak through silence as powerfully as others speak through stone. The Olmec left behind magnificent art, ritual centers like San Lorenzo and La Venta, and ceremonial complexes aligned with astronomical events. But they did not leave written chronicles, not any we can decipher with certainty. Their language, if fully developed, lies hidden in symbols scattered across jade, pottery, and stone. Their world glows quietly in fragments, like embers, never fully gone, never fully lit. The narrator walks slowly beneath imagined jungle canopy, describing how the Olmec heartland once thrived with villages, temples, and plazas. San Lorenzo, one of their earliest centers, sat on a plateau sculpted by human hands, terraces carved, water channels engineered, monuments arranged in patterns that suggest both civic planning and spiritual purpose. They moved earth and clay on a scale nearly unimaginable for their era. And then, suddenly, San Lorenzo was abandoned, a mystery repeated again and again across their homeland. Civil centers rose, flourished, then fell silent, like breaths held, then released. Scholars still debate whether natural disasters forced these abandonments or whether political upheaval fractured Olmec society. Some point to shifting rivers, reshaping the land. Others suspect internal conflict, the rise and fall of dynasties, and a few consider something more intangible, a cultural rhythm in which cities themselves were cyclical, built to shine brightly for a time, then surrendered to nature. But there are stranger details too, details that cling to the edges of Olmec lore. One such quirk is the so-called were-jaguar motif, faces carved with downturned mouths and almond eyes, merging human and jaguar into a being that seems caught between worlds. Some figurines show infants with jaguar features, as though representing a divine hybrid. No definitive explanation exists. Some propose mythology, others see shamanistic transformation. A few fringe theorists once claimed genetic memory or extraterrestrial symbolism, but archaeology gently redirects such claims toward more grounded interpretations. Still, the imagery remains haunting, unique, and profoundly enigmatic. The narrator kneels beside the colossal head in the mind's eye, brushing away leaves. Imagine carving this from basalt miles away at the Tuxtla Mountains, then transporting it to a ceremonial center using nothing but rope, rollers, rafts, and human determination. Imagine the collective effort, the songs, the sweat, the rituals performed along the journey. The stone heads were not merely sculptures. They were statements of presence, of authority, of identity carved to outlive their creators. Yet the people who carved them left fewer physical remains of themselves than the art they chiseled. La Venta, one of their greatest cities, rose like a sacred island above swampy ground. A massive pyramid, one of the earliest in the Americas, stood at its center, surrounded by mounds, plazas, and elaborate offerings. Archaeologists excavated caches of jade figurines arranged in symbolic patterns as though frozen in mid-ceremony. Rows of polished serpentine blocks, formed a mysterious mosaic floor, carefully buried beneath earth, as if intended for unseen spirits rather than human eyes. Who were these offerings for? What did they represent? Why bury beauty beneath soil? The narrator's voice lowers, letting the question resonate. Scholars still debate whether the Olmec were a unified civilization or a network of interconnected chiefdoms sharing spiritual ideologies. Some think they birthed many aspects of later Mesoamerican culture: ritual ball games, monumental architecture, jaguar deities, rain gods, and even early forms of writing and calendrics. Others caution against calling them the mother culture, preferring the term sister culture, acknowledging a shared horizon rather than a single point of origin. But regardless of academic caution, the Olmec influence echoes, softly, persistently, like drumbeats fading but never lost. The jungle hums as the narrator continues. Then, between 400 and 350 BCE, something shifted. La Venta was abandoned. San Lorenzo lay empty. Later sites dwindled, not destroyed, not conquered, simply left behind. Environmental changes likely played a role, rivers altering course, agricultural challenges, shifting trade patterns. But none of these alone explain the near-total disappearance of a culture so artistically and politically vibrant. And here lies the quiet heart of the mystery. There is no definitive evidence of where the Olmec went. Their descendants almost certainly lived on in surrounding populations. Their traditions flowed into the cultural rivers, feeding later civilizations. But the Olmec identity, the worldview that carved colossal heads and buried jade offerings, dissolved into the landscape, like footprints washed by rain, still present beneath the surface, still shaping the soil, but invisible to the casual eye. As we've seen with other vanished societies, silence can linger louder than explanation. And here, in the humid breath of Mesoamerican night, the Olmec silence feels heavy, living, intentional. The narrator guides the listener deeper into the jungle, where moonlight filters through leaves to illuminate a moss-covered altar at La Venta. Serpent motifs coil across its surface, faces half-human, half-animal watch from the stone. The air feels thick with presence, like walking into an abandoned ritual that ended only moments ago. A sudden hush, a slight stirring, the sense that if you listened closely, you might hear ancient drums in the distance. Fringe myths speak of lost Olmec cities hidden deeper in the forests, untouched for millennia. While archaeology has never confirmed these tales, LiDAR technology in recent years has revealed surprising patterns: straight lines, mounds, and platforms beneath dense vegetation, suggesting that the Olmec world may have been far larger and more interconnected than previously believed. But the full map remains blurred, promising discoveries yet to come. The narrator breathes slowly, allowing the listener to settle into the moment. A colossal head emerges from shadow, half lit, half hidden, like an oracle waiting for a question. The stone sentinel seems almost to speak not with sound, but with presence, with endurance, with an ancient calm that has watched civilizations rise and fall, watched modern languages replace ancient ones, watched time carve its own features into the land. It seems to remind us, not all mysteries demand clarity. Some are meant to be felt. The jungle fades into deep night, now humid, fragrant, alive. And from this darkness, from this world of stone guardians and silent plazas, we turn gently toward another realm, one where water and empire once danced together beneath soaring towers of sandstone, where gods walked among kings, where a civilization commanded the jungle, then succumbed to it. Ahead lies Angkor, wrapped in vines, humming beneath moonlight, and calling us forward. Angkor's soft reclamation. Night falls over Cambodia like a velvet curtain, thick, warm, and shimmering with the hum of hidden life. Cicadas pulse their steady rhythm. Palm fronds sway in slow silhouettes, and rising from the heart of this tropical darkness is a shape so vast, so intricately carved, that even the moon must pause to admire it. Angkor, a name spoken in hushed awe. A kingdom once so mighty it commanded rivers, forests, and the sky itself, now lying beneath a canopy of roots and silence. The narrator's voice enters softly, like someone stepping barefoot across ancient stones glistening with dew. Here, in the late hours when the world grows gentle, Angkor feels less like a ruin and more like a dream paused in time. Towers rise like lotus buds, reaching toward the heavens. Galleries stretch in elegant lines, etched with stories of gods, warriors, and celestial dancers. The great moat surrounding Angkor Wat, dug in the 12th century under King Suryavarman II, reflects the night sky so perfectly it blurs the line between earth and the heavens. And yet, for all its magnificence, Angkor slipped into shadow with a quietness that still unsettles historians. We walk the causeway beneath moonlight. The stones are cool beneath imagined feet, their surfaces smoothed by centuries of pilgrims, monks, and empires long gone. At this hour, the great towers appear almost weightless, floating on darkness like lanterns carved from stone. There was a time when this was the capital of the Khmer Empire, one of the largest and most sophisticated urban centers on Earth. Its population may have reached 1 million, a staggering number for the medieval world. Angkor's engineers constructed enormous reservoirs, barrages, to harness the monsoon cycles, distributing water with a precision rivaling modern hydraulic systems. Such mastery allowed rice fields to flourish across the kingdom, feeding armies, artisans, and scholars who carved entire cosmologies into sandstone. But then, season by season, year by year, the system faltered. As we noted earlier, great civilizations often leave behind more questions than answers, and Angkor is no exception. Scholars still debate whether it was climate change, political upheaval, foreign invasion, or hydraulic exhaustion that pushed its people to drift away. Perhaps it was all of these, perhaps none, perhaps a rhythm of decline too subtle to see until it was irreversible. The narrator steps into the shadows of the Bayon, where faces smile, calm, enigmatic, eternal. Carved into its towers are more than 200 serene visages, believed to depict Avalokiteshvara, or King Jayavarman VII himself, watching over the empire with infinite patience. Under moonlight, these faces glow faintly, their eyes half closed as though observing dreams rather than reality. In the quiet between breaths, the temple seems alive. But beneath its beauty lies a quirk of Angkorian engineering, a detail that has puzzled researchers for decades. Despite exquisite carvings fit for kings and gods, many of the empire's most critical hydraulic channels appear surprisingly haphazard, rerouted repeatedly within short spans of time. It is as if Angkor's water management system, its very lifeline, was in a constant state of emergency repair. And there is another fringe detail. LiDAR imaging, shot from planes using lasers to pierce the jungle canopy, revealed that Angkor was far larger than anyone imagined. Hidden grids, avenues, embankments, and entire suburbs lay completely buried beneath vegetation, a megacity, invisible for centuries, a world planning itself in silence. The narrator moves through Tarprom, now a temple gently strangled by nature. Massive tree roots coil around stone walls like serpents, their pale limbs stretching into chambers where monks once recited prayers. It feels as though the earth itself is reclaiming the kingdom, pulling architecture back into its embrace. Roots crack stone. Stone resists. Both endure. In these ruins, the boundary between destruction and beauty disappears. Imagine the last days of Angkor's golden age. Farmers tending rice paddies, watered by ancient canals. Priests lighting lamps before statues, now chipped by time. Royal processions moving through avenues lined with banners. Then a series of harsh droughts struck in the 14th and 15th centuries, followed by catastrophic floods. Water that once nourished became unpredictable, too little, then too much. The barrages silted, canals clogged, fields failed, and scholars still debate whether the Khmer people accepted these signs as part of a cosmic cycle, or whether they struggled, desperately, to keep the system alive. The night deepens, moonlight thins, torches flicker in memory. Angkor's decline was not sudden. It was a slow unravelling, threads pulling loose until the tapestry no longer held. Neighbouring states grew stronger. Trade patterns shifted. The capital moved to Phnom Penh, and gradually the jungle pressed inward. But the city did not fall to ruin in anger. It simply faded into green silence. A silence made sacred by the trees that grew through its walls. The narrator pauses beneath a towering silk cotton tree, its roots enveloping a stone doorway like fingers around an old secret. The air hums with nocturnal life, geckos clicking, frogs singing, unseen creatures rustling in the underbrush. And here, in this serene darkness, one feels the truth. Angkor teaches, some civilizations do not vanish. They transform. Angkor did not disappear. It changed form, shifting from imperial capital to monastic center, then to a forgotten jewel, then to a rediscovered wonder. It is a ghost that breathes, a ruin that remembers, a temple that still tastes incense on its stones. As we noted earlier, the past is never really past. Not when roots hold memory. Not when water channels still glint faintly where moonlight touches them. Not when faces carved in stone still smile at the night. A gentle breeze stirs the trees, and the narrator turns southward in tone and spirit. For not far beyond these jungles, wrapped in mountains and older myths, another people carved their graves into cliffs, speaking to eternity through stone. A culture whose tombs look like houses for spirits. Homes made for the dead, yet perched proudly above the world of the living. We move now toward Anatolia, toward wind-swept valleys, toward the stone-cut cities of Lycia, and their vanishing footsteps. Lycia's vanishing tomb keepers. Night drifts across the rugged mountains of southwestern Anatolia with a kind of solemn beauty, cool, steady, and faintly perfumed by pine and distant sea salt. The moon slides over jagged ridgelines, illuminating cliffs that loom like ancient guardians. And carved into those cliffs, stacked in rows like windows into the underworld, are the rock-cut tombs of the Lycian people. They stare out across the valleys, calm, patient, eternal. Homes for the dead, shaped like the homes of the living. Silent watchers over a land, once humming with voices, now softened by centuries of wind. The narrator's voice glides into this landscape with a quiet, BBC-like gravity, warm, atmospheric, and just a shade haunted. Here, in the region ancient Greeks once called Lycia, the dead were placed not below the earth, but above it. Tombs hewn directly into cliffsides. Sarcophagi perched on pedestals like guardians keeping vigil. Whole necropolises carved so intricately that, in moonlight, they resemble miniature cities glowing with pale limestone light. But the people who built these resting places, the Lycian culture, drifted into history with barely more than a whisper. Step closer, and a monumental tomb emerges from the shadow. The tomb of Amyntas, carved in the 4th century BCE, a facade resembling a Greek temple, but bearing unique Lycian traits. Doors too tall for mortals, columns cut from living rock, the interior chamber utterly bare. The narrator runs a mental fingertip along the carved edges. The Lycians lived in a land of mountains and coastlines, controlling trade routes and harbours, yet fiercely protective of their independence. Their cities, Xanthos, Myra, Pinara, Tlos, rose from hillsides like fortresses shaped by wind and stone. Their language, unlike Greek or Persian, belonged to its own ancient family, written in angular letters few could read until the 20th century. But the Lycian identity itself, that is where history grows faint. As we noted earlier, some societies leave behind architecture louder than their stories. Lycia is one of them. The narrator steps through a narrow valley in the mind's eye. The air is cool here, brushed by the faint echo of a hidden river. Above, tomb after tomb lines the cliffs, each carved to resemble a wooden house, complete with imitation beams and timber patterns. It is as though the Lycians believed a person should live after death, exactly as they lived before it, elevated, comfortable, gazing out at the land that shaped them. But there is a gentle, eerie detail whispered among scholars. Many of these tombs were not sealed tight. They were left slightly open, as though the boundary between this world and the next was meant to remain flexible, permeable. And scholars still debate whether the Lycians believed their ancestors actually wandered free to move between realms, returning in dreams, in guidance, in the rustling of evening winds. The narrator breathes slowly, letting pine-scented night settle. Lycia's political system was unusual even ahead of its time. Ancient writers described a loose federation of autonomous cities, a kind of early democratic league where each city had votes scaled by population. It was a political experiment centuries before similar ideas took root in Greece or Rome. And yet, ironically, the very people who pioneered this system allowed their own story to fade without solid documentation. A people with one of the most progressive governance structures of the ancient world, and almost no historical narrative of themselves. The mountains keep their secrets well. The narrator's steps take us towards Xanthos, a city known for its bravery and its tragedy. Around 545 BCE, when the Persians invaded under King Cyrus the Great, the Lycians chose defiance. Ancient accounts say the city's inhabitants fought until defeat seemed certain, then set their own acropolis ablaze. Families, warriors, elders, choosing unity in death rather than submission. Later, when the Greeks arrived, they recorded the story as both heroic and devastating. Whether literal or embellished, the tale carries a strange tenderness, a society that valued autonomy so fiercely that even their end became part of their identity. Yet Lycia did not vanish then. It rose again, rebuilt again, negotiated again, but slowly over centuries of Persian rule, then Greek influence, then Roman absorption, the distinct Lycian culture blurred. Their language faded from inscriptions by the 2nd century CE. Their customs dissolved into the empires that enveloped them, and their stone-carved tombs, once painted in bright colours, weathered into the pale, ghost-like facades we see today. The narrator touches on a fringe detail, a story told by early explorers in the 1800s. They claimed some Lycian sarcophagi emitted soft, flute-like tones when the evening wind passed through cracks in the stone. The phenomenon likely came from natural acoustics, but local villagers believed the tombs were speaking ancestors exhaling through stone, reminding the living that the dead still listened. The idea lingers. Soft, strange, beautiful. Imagine, the narrator suggests, standing before a cliff of tombs at dusk, the sky dimming into deep violet, olive trees rustling gently, and a faint note almost musical drifting from stone chambers carved thousands of years ago. It is here that we feel the Lycians most closely, not through chronicles, but through presence, through the sense that these are not abandoned structures, but thresholds. As we noted earlier, time sometimes preserves architecture, but erases the biographies behind it. Lycia's story survives mostly through what others wrote about them. Herodotus, Strabo, later Roman historians. Their own words, carved in an almost untranslatable script, sit incomplete. But the cliffs remember, the tombs watch. The land holds what the scrolls could not. We move now toward the Lycian Way, the modern trail that winds for hundreds of kilometers along the coast. It passes through goat paths, ruined citadels, lonely sarcophagi, tipped sideways by earthquakes, mountain passes where clouds drift low enough to brush your shoulders. Walk this trail at midnight, and you feel the ancient presence unmistakably. A civilization carved into the land so deeply that even its disappearance did not uproot it. Lycia faded not in war, not in disaster, but in absorption, dissolving into the Hellenistic and Roman worlds like a drop of ink spreading quietly through water. But their tombs? Those did not fade. They clung to cliffs, defying erosion, defying oblivion, defying silence. In the narrator's voice, the stones seemed to breathe. Each doorway, a memory. Each empty chamber, a whisper. Each carved beam, a heartbeat. And as the moon climbs higher, the cliff tombs glow faintly, as though remembering torchlight that once flickered across their facades. A quiet wind sweeps down from the mountains, cool and steady. It carries the scent of cedar and old earth, and with it comes the gentle shift of our journey, turning now toward an even older world, a world of islands and myths, a world where a civilization rose with unparalleled grace, and fell, perhaps to fire, to wave, or to something darker. Ahead lies Crete, and the trembling shadow of the Minoans. The night deepens. The narrator pauses. The cliff tombs watch in silence. The Minoans' volcanic reckoning. Night falls over the island of Crete, with a softness that almost feels deliberate, a slow descent of velvet darkness, carried by sea breeze and the quiet murmur of waves brushing ancient shores. The moon rises over the Aegean like a silver coin dropped gently into a bowl of ink, its reflection trembling across waters that once connected entire worlds. Here, beneath this serene night sky, the story of the Minoans unfolds. Europe's first great civilization, as elegant as it was enigmatic, as advanced as it was fragile, as radiant as it was doomed to fade. The narrator's voice glides gently into the scene, calm, atmospheric, tinged with the quiet gravity of dark history. On the northern side of Crete lies Knossos, the sprawling palace that archaeologist Arthur Evans uncovered in the early 20th century. Its walls, real and reconstructed, rise like fragments of a dream. Corridors twist and turn in complex patterns. Rooms bloom in airy chambers painted with dolphins, priestesses, and ritual scenes. Even in ruins, it feels alive, as though the people who once danced in its courtyards have only just stepped beyond the torchlight. Around 2000 BCE, the Minoans built a civilization so refined it almost defies imagination. They created paved roads, flushing drainage systems, multi-story buildings, vibrant frescoes, and maritime networks stretching from Cyprus to Egypt. Their artisans shaped ceramics with spirals and marine motifs. Their scribes penned mysterious scripts Linear A that scholars still struggle to decipher, its meanings trapped inside clay tablets like a language folded in on itself. And then, somewhere between beauty and collapse, silence. Not the gentle silence of decline, the sudden silence of catastrophe, but before that silence fell, the Minoans lived in a world balanced delicately between sea and earth, order and myth. Their palaces were not fortified like those of later Greeks, no tall walls, no stone battlements. Instead, they stood open and inviting, adorned with frescoes of bull leapers, priestesses, and swirling patterns that echo the rhythms of waves. A culture of ritual, ceremony, and motion. A people who danced, prayed, sailed, traded, and shaped their worldview around cycles they understood intimately. The narrator pauses, letting the imagery settle like dust in soft lamplight. Yet beneath this graceful veneer lay the seeds of vulnerability. As we noted earlier, some civilizations carved their fates into the landscapes around them, sometimes knowingly, sometimes without choice. For the Minoans, that landscape included one of the most powerful volcanic regions on Earth, Thera, the island now known as Santorini. Around 1500 BCE, Thera erupted in one of the largest volcanic events of the ancient world. Ash rained across the Aegean. Tsunamis swept toward Crete. The sky darkened, temperatures shifted, and a civilization built on trade, agriculture, and shared ritual found itself shaken to its core. Scholars still debate whether this eruption was the immediate cause of Minoan collapse, or merely the first tremor in a much longer decline. Some say the tsunamis devastated coastal towns. Some believe ash crippled crops, straining food supply. Others propose political turmoil, Mycenaean invasions, or internal fractures. But the truth remains buried beneath layers of ash and silence, refusing to settle neatly into one explanation. The narrator steps through an imagined passageway of Knossos columns, painted red and black, shadows flickering from torchlight, air scented faintly with the aroma of olive oil and sea breeze. Somewhere in the palace, a priestess offers a bowl of honey to a deity whose name we will never truly know. The moment feels intimate, ordinary, eternal, and then the ground trembles. This is not just history, but memory held in stone. Archaeologists discovered evidence of earthquake damage beneath Knossos, layers of rebuilding that suggest periods of disruption long before the final fall. The Minoans were no strangers to the Earth's restless pulse. They repaired, rebuilt, repainted. But as the narrator's voice lowers, there is a sense that each quake chipped away not only at walls, but at certainty. One fringe detail, found in later myths, hints at a cultural memory preserved in metaphor. The tale of Atlantis, described by Plato as a beautiful island civilization swallowed by the sea. Scholars caution against equating myth with literal events, but the parallels shimmer in the imagination, like reflections on dark water. A graceful island people, a sudden catastrophe, a kingdom lost beneath waves and ash. The narrator doesn't claim Atlantis was Minoan, but acknowledges how stories echo across time, reshaping older truths. Walk deeper into the nightscape of Crete, and the ruins thicken with questions. At Phaistos, another great palace, the famous Phaistos disc, was discovered a clay tablet impressed with spiraling symbols unlike anything else in the region. Scholars still debate whether it represents writing, a ritual object, or something stranger. Its uniqueness only deepens the enigma. At Akrotiri, the Minoan town preserved beneath Thera's ash, frescoes remain astonishingly vivid. Fishermen carrying nets, women in elegant gowns, blue monkeys perched on rock ledges, swirling volcanic landscapes painted with an artistry far ahead of their age. The town was abandoned before the final wave of ash, a sign that residents fled in time, perhaps after warning tremors. But fled to where? And what became of them after they escaped the island's fury? The narrator steps through these painted chambers, touching the silence that has replaced their lively colors. The Minoans rebuilt after Thera. For a while, they even flourished again. Trade resumed. Pottery styles evolved. Shrines remained active. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. Political power waned. Economic networks shrank. Influence ebbed like receding tide. By 1450 BCE, the Mycenaeans from mainland Greece occupied Crete, adopting and adapting Minoan culture, writing their own script, Linear B, on tablets found in later deposits. It is as though the Minoans dissolved slowly, their identity absorbed into the tide of incoming civilizations until little remained but echoes painted in frescoes and carved into stone. And that is perhaps the softest tragedy of all. A culture so magnificent, so advanced, so full of colour and movement, slipping away without leaving a clear goodbye, as we've seen in earlier mysteries Indus, Pueblo, Petra, Tripilia, Tartessos, the Olmec, Lycia. Civilizations often fade quietly, their stories washed into myth, their voices softened by the centuries. The Minoans are no different. Their palaces whisper, their scripts refuse to yield, their gods remain unnamed, their final moments lie hidden beneath volcanic shadow. The narrator stands at the edge of a cliff overlooking the Aegean. The sea is dark, shimmering with silver threads of moonlight. Somewhere beyond the horizon lies Thera, a half-moon of shattered island still bearing the wound of its ancient eruption. The wind carries a scent of salt and thyme. Waves lap against rock, steady as breath. The memory of the Minoans hangs in the air like a distant perfume, and from this edge of sea and myth, the journey flows onward, northward, toward another civilization that fell not to a single eruption, but to the sweeping collapse of an entire Bronze Age world. A culture of warriors, palaces, chariots, and heroes recorded in epics. A world whose sudden dusk plunged Greece into centuries of forgetting. The Mycenaeans wait, in the half-light between myth and ruin, their citadels hollow, their thrones cold, their stories trembling on the brink of darkness. The narrator breathes one final time over the waters of Crete and turns toward a storm gathering far across the Aegean. Mycenae's sudden dusk. Night drapes itself across the Greek mainland with a kind of quiet finality, a dark, velvety hush settling over hills that once trembled with chariots, bronze armor, and the clash of ancient ambitions. The air carries the faint scent of wild thyme and distant sea spray. Cicadas soften their song, and atop a rugged hill, illuminated only by a pale crescent moon, rises the citadel of Mycenae. Massive stone walls loom like sleeping giants, lions carved above the gatewatch with unblinking eyes, and the wind moves through these ruins, as if searching for voices long lost. The narrator's voice enters gently, carrying the weight of a civilization both legendary and painfully real, a world poised at the edge of myth. For centuries, the Mycenaeans dominated the Aegean. Their influence peaked around 1400, 1200 BCE, when palaces at Mycenae, Tiryns, Pylos, and Thebes commanded networks of trade that stretched from Anatolia to Egypt. They were the heroes of Homer's epics, the people of Agamemnon, of Achilles, of Odysseus. Though what remains of their true story is quieter, humbler, anchored in clay tablets and shattered walls. Their Linear B script, deciphered in 1952, reveals a world of bureaucracy, not myth. Lists of oil, rations for chariot makers, inventories of bronze, everyday details of a kingdom humming with life. And yet, somewhere in the shadows of the 12th century BCE, the Mycenaean world flickered, then dimmed, then collapsed entirely. What followed was not merely decline. It was a centuries-long dark age. The narrator walks the ancient path toward the Lion Gate. The carved beasts above the entrance glow faintly in moonlight, their faces eroded into something at once regal and mournful. The stones surrounding them, some weighing more than 10 tons, were fitted so precisely that legends later claimed they were built by a race of giants, the Cyclopes. Step inside the gate, and the ruins of a palace stretch before you. Fragments of columns, walls blackened by time, staircases leading nowhere. But once, this was a vibrant heart of Bronze Age power. Priests, scribes, artisans, warriors, and traders passed through these halls. Fires crackled in the Megaron, illuminating frescoes of griffins and swirling patterns. Bronze weapons gleamed in storerooms. The echo of sandals, of orders, of rituals faint now once pulsed through this place like a heartbeat. And then, one day, the heartbeat faltered. As we noted earlier, some civilizations fade quietly like the Minoans, like Tartessos, but the Mycenaean collapse feels different, sharper, more abrupt, more widespread. Not a single palace fell. Multiple palaces did, not in one region, across the entire Aegean. In just a few decades, around 1,200, 1,100, BCE palaces burned, populations shrank, trade routes withered, and writing vanished. Linear B disappeared. Construction halted, grave goods diminished. The sophisticated Mycenaean world, which had held its structure for centuries, fractured into something unrecognizable. Scholars still debate whether this collapse was caused by invasion, internal rebellion, earthquake storms, climate change, or the mysterious sea peoples mentioned in Egyptian records. But none of these explanations fits neatly on its own, and therein lies the haunting beauty. The collapse itself is a mosaic of half-truths, a web of forces converging, a dusk that deepened inch by inch until night arrived fully. The narrator pauses in the center of Mycenae's citadel. A breeze stirs the silence. The moon reveals glimpses of the grave circle A, where gold death masks were unearthed in the 19th century, including the famous Mask of Agamemnon, which, despite later debate, still glows with regal solemnity. The graves belong to an earlier era, centuries before the collapse, but their presence reminds us how deeply the Mycenaean world valued honor, lineage, and ceremony. Now only earth and shadow remain. Still, the ruins whisper threads of possibility. One fringe yet intriguing detail. Archaeologists have found a series of charred destruction layers across nearly every major palace, not all from the same year, but close enough to suggest a pattern. Fires intense enough to blacken stone, weapons scattered, storage jars smashed. The details feel chaotic, but also coordinated, as if the Mycenaean centers once interconnected collapsed like dominoes. Some theories propose that internal social turmoil sparked uprisings. Others suggest famine, triggered by a climate shift around 1200 BCE, may have strained royal authority. And some scholars still debate whether foreign raiders truly played a decisive role or whether the sea peoples were themselves displaced Mycenaeans fleeing a homeland in crisis. The narrator steps into the Megaron, the heart of Mycenae's palace, now only a faint outline of pillars and ash. Once, a great hearth burned brightly here, its flames dancing beneath a decorated ceiling. Messenger tablets recorded offerings to gods whose names would later echo through Greek mythology. But now, only silence. And then the story deepens. Because the Mycenaean world did not simply vanish. It left genetic, cultural, and mythic fingerprints across the region. When the dark centuries lifted around 800 BCE, Greece re-emerged, transformed. Smaller, simpler, but carrying echoes of Mycenaean language, burial customs, and hero tales. The memory of the Mycenaeans survived in oral tradition, reshaped, dramatized, elevated, until their kings became legends on the lips of bards. And here lies the strange, haunting truth. Mycenae fell, but Mycenaean names lived on in poems for generations. A civilization that collapsed so completely, it erased its own writing, yet became immortal in myth. The narrator traces this soft contradiction with a calm, measured voice. As we noted earlier, the disappearance of a culture often reveals more about resilience than about loss. The Mycenaean collapse did not end Greek civilization. It reshaped it. It pruned it. It hollowed it into something raw and ready for rebirth centuries later. But for the people who walked these ruins at the time, the experience must have felt apocalyptic. Imagine standing outside this palace as its walls smolder. Imagine the ashes drifting across the hills. Imagine farmers watching trade vessels vanish from harbors. Imagine scribes realizing no one needs their tablets anymore. A generation raised among carved stone and gold, suddenly living in thatched huts, measuring time not by written record but by memory alone. The narrator steps out of the citadel and onto the slopes below, where clusters of smaller homes once supported the palace's economy. Now they lie in rubble, grass weaving through stone. The wind sighs, the night grows deeper, and one cannot help but ask, how does a world so powerful crumble so fully? The collapse triggered what historians call the Greek Dark Age, lasting nearly 400 years. During this time, writing vanished completely, pottery styles simplified, trade stagnated, and populations declined. Villages shrank to hamlets, connections frayed, the great Mycenaean roadways cracked and eroded. And yet, somewhere in this darkness, seeds of the future quietly took root. The alphabet, geometric art, new forms of governance, and oral traditions that would one day blossom into Homer's epics. But that comes later. For now, in our story, the Mycenaean dusk still grips the landscape. The narrator turns toward the distant hills. The citadel fades behind, a silhouette against moonlit sky. The world feels poised at the edge of an age that is ending, and the beginning of something not yet formed. Ahead lies another height, another mystery, another civilization perched between earth and sky. High in the Andes, where air thins and stone temples rise at 12,000 feet, a people once thrived in a world of ice, stars, and sacred geometry. A world that fell silent so swiftly even the mountains couldn't explain why. We move now toward Tiwanaku, a place where altitude meets myth, and where monolithic stones whisper secrets of a civilization lost in the thin, cold air. The night deepens, the wind chills, the path rises, and the narrator follows. Tiwanaku's high-altitude enigma. Night at 12,000 feet is unlike night anywhere else on Earth. It is sharper cold enough to pinch the breath. It is clearer the stars burning so brightly they seem close enough to touch. And it is quieter the vast, wind-swept silence of the Altiplano, spreading across Bolivia like a dark sea of stone. Here, in this thin-air world suspended between earth and sky, the ruins of Tiwanaku rest under moonlight, monolithic, geometric, and eerily precise. The narrator's voice enters with slow, breath-soft warmth, as if mindful not to disturb anything sacred in the high-altitude stillness. Once, Tiwanaku was the beating heart of a civilization that dominated the Andean highlands long before the Inca. Flourishing between 500 and 1000 CE, its influence spread across modern Bolivia, Peru, and Chile. But unlike the Inca, who rose centuries later, Tiwanaku left no written records, no chronicles, no royal lists, no mythic poems of their kings. Instead, they left stone, and the stones speak in riddles. Moonlight glides across the Acapana pyramid, its massive steps eroded but still unmistakably grand. Water channels crafted with engineering finesse that seems almost futuristic snake through its structure, suggesting rituals involving flowing water, the sky, and sacred geometry. Nearby lies the Kalasasaya, a walled temple whose stones align with celestial events, marking solstices, equinoxes, and lunar cycles with breathtaking accuracy. As we noted earlier, some civilizations vanish in silence, but leave behind architecture that murmurs truths. Tiwanaku is one of those worlds where stone becomes scripture. Step deeper into the ruins, and the most famous figure emerges under the cold starlight, the Gate of the Sunday, a single, colossal slab of andesite carved with exquisite detail, depicting a central deity, possibly Viracocha, or an earlier sky god, surrounded by winged attendants. The figure's expression is calm, timeless, almost melancholy, as though remembering something the mountains themselves forgot. But the real mystery lies not in the figure, but in the broken corner. The monolith stands cracked. Was it lightning? Earthquake? Human hands? Or something else entirely? Scholars still debate whether the gate originally stood elsewhere, perhaps atop the Acapana, or within a grander temple now lost. Its current placement might be accidental, even misleading, but the artistry embedded in it is unmistakable, a mathematical, astronomical precision fused with mythic imagery that feels at once ancient and strangely modern. The narrator pauses, breath lingering in the thin air. The stones of Tiwanaku are huge, many weighing up to 40 tons pulled from quarries miles away across the high plains. And one fringe, intriguing detail comes from early explorers who noted magnetic anomalies in certain blocks, as though the stones had been exposed to intense heat or energetic forces. Archaeologists respond cautiously, attributing these observations to the mineral composition of the rock. But the idea of an ancient culture experimenting with unknown techniques lingers faintly, like an echo through the cold night. Move deeper still, and the semi-subterranean temple yawns below the earth, its walls lined with hundreds of carved stone heads embedded into the masonry. No two faces are alike. Some appear human, some grotesquely stylized, some elongated, some wearing expressions that feel eerily modern. Who were these faces? Ancestors? Deities? Enemies? Or symbols of something far older? The narrator's voice softens further, as if reaching the very edge of breath. At this altitude, the stars feel closer than memory, and Tiwanaku's people understood them intimately. They built their temples aligned to constellations, tracked agricultural cycles through celestial movements, and perhaps, according to some scholars, calculated solar years with greater accuracy than contemporary civilizations across the world. But then, sometime around 1000 CE, this high-altitude empire fell silent. Not destroyed, not conquered, simply mute. Archaeological layers show signs of drought, decades of it, triggered by climatic shifts across the Andes. Lake Titicaca's water levels dropped, crops withered. The finely calibrated agricultural system, which depended on raised fields and canals, faltered. Communities dispersed. Urban centers emptied. Rituals faded. But there is another curious detail. Some structures at Tiwanaku were abandoned mid-construction. Massive stones left half-shaped, blocks positioned but never fitted, works in progress frozen forever in place, as if the builders walked away one afternoon and never returned. Scholars still debate whether this abandonment was sudden or gradual, whether it was caused by environmental collapse, political upheaval, or even shifts in spiritual belief. The narrator steps lightly across a threshold of stone blocks cut so precisely that a knife blade can slip between them. The joints are immaculate, the angles deliberate. It is difficult not to feel the presence of hands that understood material and measurement as extensions of the sacred. And yet Tiwanaku lacked many things other great civilizations possessed. No written language, no wheel, no pack animals capable of hauling these loads, only human strength, human ingenuity, human faith. Imagine the final nights of Tiwanaku, not catastrophic, but quietly sorrowful. Priests lighting last fires in temple alcoves, farmers watching fields turn brown beneath an indifferent sky, families deciding whether to stay or descend into valleys where water still flowed, generations raised among monoliths turning to simpler lives, leaving the great stones to weather in solitude. The narrator stands at the edge of the Kalasasaya platform, where shadows stretch long and thin. The horizon glows faintly with starlight. The air is sharp with cold, and for a moment, the city feels alive again. Faces illuminated, rituals underway, water gliding through channels like silver threads. But blink, and only silence remains. As we noted earlier, some civilizations dissolve not with fire or conquest, but with a slow exhale, a letting go, a surrender to time and element. Tiwanaku is such a world. Its people did not vanish. Their descendants live today in Aymara and Quechua communities, traditions echoing ancient rhythms, ritual sites still active, beliefs still entwined with mountains and sky. Yet the empire itself, the unified vision, the monumental scale, those pieces remain locked in stone, waiting for understanding. The narrator breathes the cold, thin air. From this high place, this world between sky and earth, the story now drifts north and west, toward another civilization whose power was carved across continents, yet whose end came so completely that even their name vanished for 3,000 years. A people of iron and law, of diplomacy and empire, a people erased so thoroughly that history forgot them until the 20th century. We turn now toward the Hittites, toward a kingdom extinguished in flame, toward an empire lost to silence. The night holds its breath, the wind sharpens, the stones watch, and the journey continues. The Hittites' violent erasure. Night settles over central Anatolia with a stern, windswept calm, a darkness shaped by stone ridges, barren plains, and the distant echo of wolves threading through the cold air. The moon hangs low over the plateau, its pale light brushing the rugged ruins of Hattusa, once the formidable capital of a kingdom that stood among the great powers of the Bronze Age. Tonight, under this ancient sky, the stones whisper of an empire erased so completely that for 3,000 years the world forgot it ever existed. The narrator's voice enters with a slow, deep warmth, calm, atmospheric, but edged with the gravity of a catastrophe long buried. In the 14th and 13th centuries BCE, the Hittites were one of the superpowers of their age, rivals of Egypt, masters of ironworking, treaty makers, empire builders. Their kings negotiated with Ramses II. Their armies rode into battle with chariot divisions strong enough to shake desert sands. Their archives, written in cuneiform, spoke of law codes, diplomacy, myths, and rituals in astonishing detail. Yet for all their power, precision, and record-keeping, their end came with such totality that not even their name survived. Not in Greek memory, not in Roman commentary, not in medieval chronicles. For millennia, their entire empire existed only as a faint biblical reference, a footnote mistaken for a minor tribe. The narrator's steps drift slowly toward the Lion's Gate at Hattusa, where massive stone guardians still keep watch. Their faces, softened by centuries of wind, seem to gaze out at the night with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Beyond them, The ruins stretch across rolling hills, temples, storerooms, palace foundations, each shadowed under the cold Anatolian moon. Hattusa feels vast, even in ruin, and eerily empty. As we noted earlier, some civilizations fade, gently quiet collapses, slow abandonments. The Hittites did not. Their end was sudden, violent, a disappearance so complete that it reads almost like a vanishing act. Around 1200 BCE, the same era that dimmed the Mycenaean world, Hattusa burned. Archaeologists uncovered thick ash layers, charred beams, scorched foundations, melted pottery, fire so intense it warped stone, destruction so deliberate it felt like a final, furious punctuation. And yet, no one knows who lit the flames. Scholars still debate whether the city fell to internal revolt, external invasion, migrating tribes, or a combination of all. The famous Sea Peoples might have played a role, but evidence remains elusive. The collapse aligns with the broader, late Bronze Age collapse, a chain reaction of destruction spanning the entire eastern Mediterranean. But identifying the exact spark that consumed Hattusa, that remains one of archaeology's most persistent shadows. The narrator moves deeper into the ruins, torchlight flickering in the imagination. The great temple, once home to the storm god Tarhunt and the sun goddess Arena, lies silent now. Its vast courtyard, large enough to host thousands, feels strangely intimate under moonlight. Broken lion statues flank the entrances. Doorways sag inward. The stones hold memories of rituals spoken in a language lost for centuries. But among the ruins lies a curious, almost tender detail. Archaeologists discovered baked clay, bully clay ceilings scattered near storerooms. They belonged to scribes who once catalogued grain shipments, livestock, tribute, and royal correspondence. Some bear fingerprints, perfectly preserved, as if the scribe pressed too hard in haste. Those fingerprints, tiny, human, ancient, survive long after the people vanished. They are the last touch of a forgotten empire. The narrator pauses to breathe the cold night air. Though the Hittites wielded iron weapons, codified laws, international treaties, and military might, they were also a culture of subtlety. They loved myth stories of gods who argued, fell, reconciled. They cherished diplomacy, negotiating peace with Egypt after the Battle of Kadesh, producing one of the earliest surviving international treaties. They built archives, libraries of 30,000 tablets at Hattusa. They understood the world as a web of relationships between kings, gods, and nature. But none of this saved them. Their collapse was not merely political. It was cultural, civilizational, existential. Cities beyond Hattusa were abandoned. Trade routes evaporated. The royal dynasty disappeared into obscurity. The narrator steps toward the Yazilikaya sanctuary, an outdoor stone gallery where dozens of gods are carved in procession. Under moonlight, these figures seem almost alive, striding in quiet unison across the cliff face. Their feet barely touch the rock, their headdresses tall, their bodies elongated in divine symmetry. In the center stands the supreme storm god, clasping the world, surrounded by celestial beings. This was the spiritual heart of the Hittites, a place where kings prayed before military campaigns, harvest rituals, and coronations. A place where myth met stone. Yet even this sacred sanctuary could not hold back the tide of collapse. And soon after, the Hittites were forgotten, not remembered poorly, not remembered wrongly, simply not remembered at all. For 3,000 years, their empire vanished from human knowledge. Their language slept silent on clay tablets buried under dust. Their gods faded from worship. Their stories dissolved. It wasn't until the early 20th century that explorers uncovered Hattusa's ruins and archives, finally revealing that the biblical Hittites were only a faint echo of a vast imperial power. The narrator repeats this softly, almost reverently, a world-class empire, completely erased from memory for 3 millennia. How does that happen? As we noted earlier, when the structures holding a society together collapse from drought, invasion, trade breakdown, or internal revolt, the collapse can cascade so deeply that even memory fails to carry forward. But the Hittites' disappearance stands apart. Not even myth preserved them, not even rumor. They were gone, until written in clay, rediscovered. And yet another eerie detail lingers, one almost too poetic to ignore. Near the end, during the empire's final generation, scribes inscribed the last known royal prayer of a Hittite king. In it, The king begs the gods to forgive the sins of his predecessors, pleading for mercy upon his people as famine, plague, and enemy pressure converged. It is a voice crying out in desperation, a final whisper before the fire. The narrator stands now at the summit of the Hattusa citadel, looking out across the Anatolian plain. Wind cuts across the ruins. The stars glow cold and distant. The empire is gone, but the question lingers. What does it take for an entire civilization to disappear so thoroughly that even its name must be rediscovered? The answer remains as elusive as the sea peoples, as ambiguous as shifting climate, as fragile as power built on brittle foundations. The night deepens over the empty capital, and from this burned, forgotten empire, the storyteller gently guides us onward, toward tropical jungles again, toward another site of mystery and abandonment, toward a ceremonial center, once vibrant with spiritual energy, then forsaken, swallowed by vines and quiet earth. La Venta waits in the shadows, a heart once beating at the edge of Olmec forests, now silent, enigmatic, patient. The narrator takes one last breath of Anatolia's cold winds and turns toward the humid whisper of jungles further west. La Venta's forsaken heart. Night returns to the tropics with a slow, heavy grace, the kind of darkness that settles like warm velvet on the skin, thick with humidity, thick with the soft rustle of palm fronds swaying under unseen currents. The jungle's breath is steady, rhythmic, alive. Fireflies drift like tiny lanterns through the underbrush, and somewhere within this deep green night lies a mound broad, sloping, and overgrown with silence. This is La Venta, one of the final great ceremonial centers of the Olmec world, a place where stone, spirit, and earth converged, then fell quiet as if by mutual agreement. The narrator's voice enters slowly, calm, immersive, atmospheric like a storyteller holding a lantern in a forgotten temple. Long before the Maya scribes recorded dynasties, before Zapotec cities rose in valleys, before Teotihuacan sent its influence across Mesoamerica, the Olmec civilization flourished along the Gulf Coast. They built colossal heads, ritual altars, and complex ceremonial spaces. They carved jaguar-human hybrids. They shaped jade into miniature worlds. And La Venta, from 900 to 400 BCE, was one of their most sacred centers. But what makes La Venta so compelling is not only its scale, but its strange, deliberate abandonment. The narrator moves through the humid night, tracing the contours of Complex A, one of the site's most enigmatic zones. Under moonlight, its earthen mounds resemble sleeping giants, their surfaces softened by centuries of rain and roots. Yet beneath that gentle facade lies a world of precision and ritual. Because the Olmec did not merely build La Venta, they engineered it. Hidden beneath these mounds, archaeologists discovered massive mosaic pavements, serpentine blocks arranged in geometric patterns, buried face down, never meant to be seen again. Offerings placed with exquisite care, jade figurines standing in mysterious formation, celts arranged like rays of green lightning, shards of obsidian shimmering where torches once reflected. And scholars still debate whether these mosaics were symbolic maps, portals to the underworld, or offerings intended for supernatural beings beneath the earth. The narrator pauses, allowing the night sounds to fill the silence. As we noted earlier with other vanished cultures, La Venta leaves behind more questions than answers. For here, in the dense Mexican jungle, the Olmec constructed a ceremonial core, aligned not with the cardinal directions but with something else entirely. The site is oriented about 8 degrees west of north, a choice believed to mirror astronomical or ritual significance. The reason remains uncertain, though some propose alignments with star cycles or sacred mountains. At the edge of a clearing stands Altar 4, one of La Venta's most iconic monuments. Under the moon, its carved surface appears ghostly, a ruler emerging from a cave-like mouth, gripping a rope that coils around a figure. Some interpret it as a shaman entering the spirit world. Others see a ruler accessing ancestral realms. Still, others imagine a mythic journey recorded in stone. Then comes a fringe detail, gentle, curious, intriguing. Some early explorers claim to hear faint, drum-like echoes when standing at certain points atop the site's main pyramid. This effect, likely caused by acoustics bouncing off layers of compacted earth, sparked local legends that the Olmec pyramids spoke at night. While scientific explanation grounds this phenomenon, the imagery remains haunting. A pyramid that hums softly under moonlight, carrying whispers of ancient ceremonies. The narrator smiles subtly through tone, acknowledging myth without surrendering to it fully. La Venta's Great Pyramid rises like a dark cone, one of the earliest monumental pyramids in the Americas, made not of stone, but of earth layered basket by basket, its shape more natural than geometric. A mound sculpted with human intention, a hill transformed into a sacred beacon. Imagine priests ascending it during nighttime rituals, torches blazing, incense smoke spiraling upward, jaguar pelts rustling in warm wind. Tonight, though, the pyramid is silent. Only shadows climb its slopes. And then, the great mystery of La Venta unfolds. For reasons no text records, no carving explains, and no oral tradition clarifies, the Olmec abandoned La Venta around 400 BCE. Not gradually, not partially, completely. Ceremonial sites were carefully covered with layers of clay. Volcanic pavements were buried intentionally. Statues were defaced or relocated. Offerings were sealed beneath earth. This was not a panicked fleeing. It was a ritual closing, a shutdown of a sacred center with methodical finality. Why? Scholars still debate whether La Venta's end was environmental shifting rivers, unstable marshlands, or political, tied to rival powers rising inland. Some have suggested internal upheaval, a spiritual redirection, or shifts in ritual practice. Others see echoes of what we observed in the Cucuteni Tripilia world, cycles of construction and ceremonial closure. But none of these explanations fully satisfies. For the Olmec at La Venta seem to have orchestrated their own disappearance, curating it, sculpting it, guiding it like one last ceremony. The narrator steps deeper into the jungle darkness, passing mounds that glow faintly in the starlight. Cicadas pulse like distant drums. The air thickens, warm and earthy. Underneath one mound lies the famous Offering 4, a tableau of jade and serpentine figurines arranged in a semicircle around a row of polished celts. The scene resembles a ritual meeting, frozen in stone. The craftsmanship is impossibly delicate. Some figurines face each other. Others seem to gaze upward as if communicating with unseen presences. Were these participants in a myth? Representatives of clans? Symbolic ancestors? Or something more abstract, cosmic forces captured in miniature? As we noted earlier, the Olmec left no written record to decode these meanings. Their stories live in stone and silence, not in scripts or scrolls. The jungle rustles softly, as if drawn into the narrator's breath. Then comes an unsettling detail. Some monuments at La Venta were deliberately broken before being buried. Heads removed, carvings erased, patterns obscured, not by invaders, by the Olmec themselves. It is as though the closing ritual demanded a release, returning power, spirit, or memory back to the earth. Imagine the night of abandonment. The final ceremony, torches illuminating faces painted with ritual clay, drums echoing against the humid air, priests burying mosaics, sealing offerings, dismantling monuments, the final ember of a civilization glowing softly, then fading into darkness. And after that, silence, only forest, and time. La Venta was rediscovered in the 20th century, its mounds mistaken at first for natural hills, but beneath these gentle shapes lay centuries of ritual memory, carefully tended, carefully sealed, carefully surrendered. The narrator breathes the warm air, letting the jungle cradle the final words of this chapter. Civilizations do not always fall. Sometimes, they choose to end their stories on their own terms. A gentle sigh passes through the branches overhead. Fireflies drift in slow spirals. And from this tropical silence, the path shifts across a vast ocean, toward a lonely island of volcanic rock, toward a people who carved giants from stone, toward a society that rose brilliantly, fell into shadow, yet lived on in resilience. Ahead lies Rapa Nui, Easter Island, where silence has a different sound, the sound of giants watching the sea. The narrator turns toward the waves of the Pacific, guiding you softly onward. Easter Island's quiet reckoning. Night comes to Rapa Nui with an almost sacred stillness, the kind of deep, ocean-born quiet that wraps the island in velvet darkness. Waves hiss softly against black volcanic rock. The wind glides over grasslands like a slow exhale. And scattered across the moonlit slopes stand the Moai, enormous stone figures carved by ancient hands, their silhouettes rising like sentinels watching the Pacific breathe. The narrator's voice emerges gently, low and atmospheric, the way a quiet documentary might open on a lonely, starlit coast. This is Easter Island, known to its people as Rapa Nui, a remote fragment of volcanic Earth, adrift in the immensity of the Pacific over 2,000 kilometers from its nearest neighbor. A world unto itself, a world shaped by isolation, ingenuity, and struggle, and a world whose dramatic story, though often distorted by legend, remains one of history's most haunting riddles. The Moai glow silver in the moonlight. Rows of them, some restored atop platforms called ahu, others lying fallen, their massive faces partly buried in grass. Others still standing proud and patient, gazing inland toward the people who once carved them. For centuries, these statues have stirred the imagination of travelers. How were they moved? Why were they built? And why did their civilization collapse so sharply, leaving behind only stone, stories, and silence? The narrator moves slowly across the dark plain toward Ahu Tongariki, the largest ceremonial platform on the island. 15 giants stand here, their forms illuminated by the faint blue glow of the rising moon. Each figure is distinct, carved between 1,100 and 1,600 CE by the Rapa Nui people during a cultural flowering that transformed the island into a landscape of monumental devotion. But the mystery is not just the Moai. The mystery is the fall. As we noted earlier, civilizations often leave behind silent ruins with their final chapters sealed in ambiguity. Easter Island's story, perhaps more than any other, became tangled in myth, morality tales, and speculation. Early Western explorers framed it as a parable of self-destruction, suggesting the islanders cut down every tree, wrecked their own environment, and descended into chaos. But modern scholars challenge this narrative, and scholars still debate whether the island's collapse was caused by resource strain, European contact, introduced diseases, internal warfare, or some painful combination of them all. The narrator sits in the grass before one of the toppled Moai, letting moonlight pool around its immense features. The truth, as always, is both simpler and infinitely more human. Rapa Nui's early population built extraordinary sculptures, some weighing over 70 tons. They carved them from the slopes of Roanoke, the quarry, where hundreds more Moai still stand unfinished, half-buried, tilted at strange angles as if frozen mid-journey. The statues were transported miles across the island, using methods scholars continue to refine. Experiments suggest they walked the statues upright, using coordinated manpower, swaying them forward in controlled, rhythmic steps. But what drove this effort? It was not vanity, not worship of gods, but reverence for ancestors, for lineage, family, and protection. Each Moai embodied a chief or elder, whose manner spiritual power watched over the clan. This was not a society obsessed with kings. It was a society anchored in ancestry. Yet by the 17th century, the carving ceased. Platforms were abandoned. Many Moai toppled, and the once unified social order began to fracture. The narrator's tone grows softer, darker. Some believe environmental strain played a role. The island once had forests of towering palm trees, the same species found in Chile today. These disappeared over centuries, likely due to agriculture, canoe building, and possibly even the Polynesian rat, an invasive species that devoured the seeds. With deforestation came soil erosion, declining yields, and fewer resources for building and transport. Others argue for internal conflict. Still others point to drought cycles. And some note that European arrival in 1722, followed by slave raids and epidemics, devastated the population far more severely than pre-contact struggles ever did. A quirky yet illuminating detail lies in the Birdman cult, a late religious shift that emerged after Moai construction ended. On the cliffs of Orongo, petroglyphs depict bird-headed figures, symbols of an annual ritual competition. Warriors raced down cliffs, swam through shark-infested waters to a small islet, retrieved a sacred egg of the sooty tern, and returned to the top. The winner's clan gained prestige for a year. This transition from statue carving to ritual competition reveals how societies adapt when old systems falter. It wasn't collapse, it was transformation. The narrator walks toward the edge of Roanoke, the massive volcanic crater whose mirror-still lake reflects the stars like a second sky. Wind sweeps across the caldera, carrying a mix of salt and ancient memory. The islanders endured through hardship, famine, raids, colonization, enslavement. Their population collapsed to barely 100 by the 1,870 seconds. But the culture did not die. Rapa Nui people live here still. They speak their language. They practice their traditions. They maintain a deep, sacred connection to the Moai. The collapse was real, but so was the resurrection. As we noted earlier, the end of a civilization's monumental age does not always mark the end of its people. Rapa Nui's story is not a tragedy of total disappearance. It is a story of resilience overshadowed by misunderstanding. The narrator kneels beside a Moai face half buried in earth, its eyes long gone, its contours soft and rounded from generations of wind. In the quiet, the Moai seems almost to breathe, as if the ancestor within the stone still watches over the island. Imagine the last night before everything changed. Torches flickering on cliffs, priests whispering chants in the darkness, waves crashing rhythmically against the volcanic shore, and in the distance, a faint, unfamiliar silhouette, the sails of a European ship approaching, a new world about to enter an old one, a future pressing into the past. The narrator breathes deeply, letting the Pacific night settle. From this island of giants and endurance, we now drift gently toward the final chapter. One last mystery, not ancient like the others, but modern, raw, and haunting. A colony vanished, a single word carved into wood, and 4 centuries of questions. Ahead lies Roanoke, the first missing settlement of the New World. The Pacific wind quiets, the Moai stand watch. The journey's almost done. Roanoke's unfinished whisper. Night folds gently over the Carolina coast like a silk shroud, cool, damp, and heavy with the scent of salt marsh and pine. The Atlantic murmurs against the outer banks, a sound too old for memory, too steady for doubt. A soft fog drifts across Roanoke Island, curling around crooked trunks and low brush, as if searching for something lost long ago. And under the pale wash of moonlight, the forest waits, silent, watchful, holding a riddle that has unsettled historians for more than 4 centuries. The narrator's voice enters softly, in that dark history tone that feels almost whispered into the night. This is Roanoke, the place where 115 English colonists, men, women, children, settled in 1587, hoping to begin a new life in a land dense with promise and uncertainty. Led by Governor John White, they built their small outpost on this quiet island, surrounded by tall grasses and still waters, far from the world they had known. And within 3 years, they vanished, leaving behind no bodies, no signs of struggle, no graves, no final message, except one carved word, Croatoan. The narrator pauses, letting the fog settle like a held breath. As we noted earlier, many disappearances echo through our story, but Roanoke is different. Not ancient ruins softened by millennia, not a civilization dissolved into myth, but a community lost in the relative infancy of recorded American history, close enough to document, yet distant enough to remain unresolved. The night deepens. Cicadas hush. Only the ocean speaks. The colonists had arrived under precarious circumstances. Supplies were scarce. Relations with local tribes were fragile. The promise of abundance had quickly given way to the hard truth of survival. Governor White returned to England later that year to gather provisions, a journey he intended to last only a few months. But war intervened. England and Spain clashed at sea. The Spanish Armada threatened invasion, and White was stranded for 3 long years. By the time he returned in 1590, he found the settlement deserted, palings dismantled, houses gone, fences removed, no footprints, no ashes, no sign of struggle, just that single carved word on a post, Croatoan, the name of a nearby island, now Hatteras Island, inhabited by native allies. It was not a plea, not a warning, not a farewell, just a location, a clue so clear, it became somehow more confusing. The narrator walks slowly across the imagined clearing, where the Roanoke houses once stood, grass swaying gently, the moon turning dew into tiny diamonds. The forest edge looms just beyond the open space, the shadows thick and layered. The disappearance has become a legend of American dark history, but beneath the folklore lies humanity, a group of families facing hunger, uncertainty, and isolation, forced to make a choice no one witnessed. And scholars still debate which choice they made. Did they relocate peacefully to Croatoan Island? Did they integrate with local tribes? Did they move inland, driven by famine or alliance? Or did something darker occur, disease, conflict, a storm, or misfortune now erased by centuries of tide and weather? No single answer satisfies. The narrator kneels in the grass, touching the earth lightly as though sensing echoes. There is a curious historical detail, soft, subtle, easily overlooked. Before leaving Roanoke in 1587, Governor White instructed the colonists, if they ever faced forced danger, they must carve a cross along with any message indicating their new location. On the post at the abandoned settlement, there was no cross, only the word Croatoan, a clue that suggested no violence, no crisis, a relocation intentional, voluntary, hopeful. And yet, when White tried to reach Croatoan Island, storms and broken anchors forced his ships away. He never returned to search again. No one did. Not for centuries. The narrator's voice drifts like fog over dark water. Imagine, for a moment, the final days of the colony. Crops failing, game scarce, fishing unpredictable, isolation deepening like a shadow. Perhaps the colonists turned to their Croatoan allies for help. Voices at night offering guidance, canoes drifting across gentle water, hands extended in welcome. Perhaps they left Roanoke together. Perhaps the word carved into wood was not a mystery, but a message of hope. And yet the mystery deepened over time. A fringe detail, often retold though never fully proven. In later decades, European settlers in the region reported native tribes with grey eyes, European features, or English names. Stories of a tribe who welcomed them with strange familiarity. Stories of oral traditions, speaking of people who came not as enemies, but as family. Were these echoes of Roanoke's descendants? Possibly, but time corrodes evidence, and translation erodes certainty. The narrator moves toward the shoreline, where the gentle waves lap against the sand. The same waves that once greeted the colonists' wooden boats and carried their footprints along the beaches. The night breeze carries the scent of salt and cedar. As we noted earlier, some lost communities left silence heavy with tragedy. But Roanoke's disappearance feels softer, like a chapter left unfinished, rather than erased. There is no sign of massacre, no stolen goods, no charred ruins, just absence, purposeful, quiet, elusive. Another strange detail emerges from archaeology. Several miles inland, stone tools and European artifacts have been found near native settlements dating to the early 1600s. Not trade goods objects used, worn, integrated into daily life. Hints that some members of the lost colony may have lived on. There are also the Dare Stones, a series of carved rocks discovered in the 20th century, claiming to tell Eleanor Dare's story of survival. Scholars debate their authenticity, most considered likely hoaxes, but at least one stone's weathering remains suspiciously difficult to dismiss entirely. Fragments, leads, whispers, nothing conclusive. The narrator steps into the tree line, the forest dark and dreamlike. Branches creak, the ground is soft with fallen needles. It is easy to imagine faint voices lingering here, children laughing, tools striking wood. The distant rhythm of a village settling down for the night, and then gone. A settlement vanished not into myth, but into possibility. The most haunting question of Roanoke is not only what happened, but why no one ever found them despite the clue they left. Storms, political apathy, changing priorities, a vast, uncharted wilderness. Roanoke became a ghost too quickly. Its trail washed out before the search truly began. Yet the story refuses to die. Even now, archaeologists uncover new hints near Hatteras Island post holes, shards of pottery, gunflints from the right era. Each new find whispers the same possibility, that the colonists weren't lost at all. They were absorbed, transformed, woven into the tapestry of indigenous life. And perhaps, in that merging, they found a kind of survival beyond the reach of English memory. The narrator steps back onto the moonlit beach. Waves roll in gentle pulses. A lone piece of driftwood lies half buried in sand, smoothened by tide, shaped by the patience of water. It resembles, faintly, the kind of post on which the message Croatoan was carved. A message meant to guide. A message meant to be followed. A message misunderstood by history. The wind drifts through the long grasses. The fog thins. The ocean glints like a sheet of black glass. Roanoke does not shout its mystery. It whispers, barely audible, soft as a feather falling through dusk. And in that whisper, it joins all the others. The Indus scribes, the Puebloan cliff dwellers, Petra's hidden artisans, Tropilia's firekeepers, Tartessian traders, Olmec stone shapers, Angkor's water builders, Lycia's tomb keepers, the Minoan dancers, Mycenaean kings, Tiwanaku astronomers, Hittite emperors, Laventa ritualists, and Rapa Nui's ancestors, all of them carrying the same quiet truth. that disappearance is not always death. Sometimes it is transformation, migration, or the slow blending of stories into new names and new lives. The narrator lets the final breath of night settle gently upon the island. Ahead, beyond the dunes, dawn is beginning to gather, a faint stripe of pale gold touching the horizon. And from this last mystery, we float now toward the ending. One final moment of reflection, a soft closing chapter, a whispered farewell to the ghosts who walked beside us. But that comes after this section ends. For now, the night still holds Roanoke in its quiet embrace, and the ocean keeps its secrets just beneath the surface. Conclusion. Night exhales across the many worlds we've wandered, drawing a gentle veil over stones, deserts, jungles, and distant shores. 15 civilizations, each once warm with breath and memory, now lie hushed beneath moonlight. None vanished in the way legends often claim. They dimmed, they drifted, they transformed. Their cities softened into sand and forest, their names dissolved into wind, their voices thinned into echoes that still brush our centuries like quiet fingertips. And yet, in their silence, something remains. A pulse, a shimmer, a promise that the past is never truly gone, only folded carefully into the landscapes that outlast us all. As dawn approaches, the world brightens just enough to hint at new questions waiting in the half-light. Mysteries still breathe under every ruin, and if we listen softly, patiently, the dark history of humanity becomes not a tale of loss, but a constellation of lives continuing beyond their final footprints.